And we are going live. Isn't that amazing how that works? You just go live and it goes live. You just tell it to do stuff. It's amazing. It's almost like it's technology or something. It's Friday. It is time for episode 49 of KTLO, Keeping the Learning On, whatever that means. And we are here with our friends. Today's episode is we'll be here long after you'll be gone. Now, that's not true today, of course. We're not going to stay on all day after you leave, but we will be here long after you'll be gone. And that will all become clear as we talk through this topic. And who are we? We are Patty Blackstaff in Western Canada, Greg Sanker in Oregon, Simone Jo Moore in the southwest of France, and yours truly in South Carolina, USA. And we have guests with us today. Daniel Breston is here. Dee Burgoyne is here. We'll see who else pops in as the time goes on. And today's interviewer is Simone. So we're going to go to Simone for our questions du jour.
Oh, I love the fact that it's questions. We have an S on the end, which means that I think this is going to be a lively conversation. Sorry, I had a moment there, a French moment. Apologize. No, not at all. I don't apologize for wanting to go where I needed to go. I think that actually fits a little bit into our theme. Not apologizing to go where you need to go. I think when some people, just remember the first time you came into the organization as a leader, or you're sitting there and someone new has come in. Some people, when they first arrive at a new organization, they start what we might call kingdom building. And unfortunately, it's usually just a veneer. You know, they change the decor, they make things look pretty, they get their KPIs and brownie points for, hey, look at these little pretty win things that we've done. But they're not really changing the core to any depth. And then there are the leaders that really want to make a difference, but they're not getting the support they need. So then there's a constant struggle against the times that they're in. What we can hope, if we have managed to succeed in really getting to the depth and making the changes, that I think the most amazing thing is that those changes actually stay in place because they made a difference. So no matter where we went afterwards, they've made a difference. So, you know, keeping those sorts of things in mind, I think most of you will be, you may have said this, but Greg, where did, that's not the way we've always done it, come from?
Yeah, who hasn't actually heard that? You know, organizations have this, I don't know what it is. I think organizations have a unique kind of a molecular structure, if you will. I joined an organization that one of the first things that I noticed was everybody was wearing these badges with the initials of "that's not the way we've always done it" with a circle and a line through it. And I said, thankfully kept it in my head, any organization that has to have the managers wearing a button to remind us that that's a cultural element that we want to part ways with probably has a significant problem with exactly that. So, so one of the things that I learned in that organization is if you come in and try to drive change is that the organization itself actually acts like a body. And when foreign objects come into a body, and I'm talking like a human body, like a virus, I don't know I don't know when we talk about viruses around here or anything like that, but the body deals with foreign bodies by dispatching antibodies, and it encircles and inoculates and expels that foreign body. And isn't that what we do to people who try to drive change in an organization, particularly when you don't really understand the power structure, the culture, the people, the history, and all of those other elements? And so that's not the way we've always done it. It's like, where did it come from? I think it just comes from, you want to hang out with like-minded people, and like it or not, these people you work with, these are my people. And eventually that becomes the way we do it, however you've done it. And then it gets cast in stone, and people are disinclined to change it. So it's really a deeply rooted, almost at the organizational molecular level, this anti-change that's not necessarily intentional, but it's just automatic.
Yeah, that protection system comes into play. Yeah.
Ever been to foreign body?
Yeah.
I have.
France hasn't expelled me yet.
I wasn't going there, but thank you.
I just thought you might need that one. There you go. I'm still here. Right. Actually, this brings up a really good point. What, in your experience, then, has caused this skepticism and cynicism about proposed changes? Why don't we accept this in?
Are you? Was that directed in my direction?
Oh, it certainly was.
Oh, okay. Usually, from what I've seen, it happens because, oh, we've seen this before. We know exactly what's going to happen. You're going to tell us that we're going to do this, and it'll fail after 3 months, and then you'll be out of here, and you'll be gone, and we'll still be here, which, of course, is where the title comes from. So failed changes, in my experience, is the primary cause of this attitude. It also is just the fact that we like to do things. We like routines. We're creatures of routines, whether we like it or not. And we find our comfort zones, and we want to stay there. I don't want to move unless somebody makes me really uncomfortable. So maybe discomfort is part of it too.
I think so. So is it a symptom or a syndrome? And what are we going to do to get around that? What's an ingredient going to get around that?
It's every word that starts with sim.
It's symptomatic.
Yeah, you just need sim own. That's all you need is sim one.
It's a clang
to my experience. It simulates the biological.
Oh dear. So what's your ingredient that's going to help overcome it?
Me? What?
Yeah,
Am I still speaking?
I'm still looking at you.
Oh, well, it's commitment. And usually this failed change happens, or a lot of times the failed change happens because there's no real commitment. It's, we're going to have somebody take care of that change. We're going to, you're going to take care of this change, and you report back to me after it's done, and everything will be perfect. But of course, if there isn't that total commitment right from the top that says, this is the direction we're going to go in. We want to get here. I have a vision for this. We're going to arrive at this place. We're going to do this, and we're all going to do it together. That if you have that kind of movement, then it tends to take that skepticism out of the picture.
Yeah, it can indeed. Hey, I want to welcome Kathy and NJ for joining us too, since they came in as we'd already started, and we'll get to our guest interlude in a little bit. But I'm just thinking about that commitment, and managers just say, yeah, let's go off, just do the change, come back to me. Patty, you know what? I think people get pretty tired of all this change thing. We've heard of change fatigue. What is it, and why does it actually matter?
I'm going to touch on a couple of things, Greg. I liked how you said the molecular structure, because that really is the cultural DNA that you're talking about. That the DNA of the culture is saying we really like who we are. And then Roy talks about failed change and we love our comfort zones and our routines, and we need a commitment. When all of those things are compiled together, we begin to see major fatigue within an organization when there's repetitive change. So I'm going to stop for a minute and I want to acknowledge the significant impacts of the last year. We've been absorbing change on a massive scale everywhere, and I'm not just talking about work. Work certainly has been significant, but all of a sudden, for the first time for everyone across the board, it's impacted kids, families, spouses, homes, jobs, lives. This pandemic has created change in a way that has significantly caused us to be forced to be resilient through some amazing and unbelievably repetitive ways across the board. Everything is impacted, right? So what is change fatigue? It's layers of change that impact individuals. It's when change is thrust upon us without preparation or warning and we have to react. It's ignoring the incremental changes that lead to the big move. So there's, oftentimes at work or in major projects or in transformation, we think about the end product, but we fail to look at all the incremental changes we're asking people to make across the board, right? I talk with my hands. I think in a past life I was Italian. Anyway, when our environment is not supported for adaptability, we begin to grow weary, right? So what kinds of change fatigue are there? There's repetitive fatigue that constantly hits you and slams you in your time constraints and your barriers to absorption. Then there's learning fatigue. Sometimes we just don't have the quality of the training, or the format of the training doesn't meet the way we learn, or there's a frequency of change with training that is layered so fast we can't keep up. And then sometimes it's just no training at all. And then we have the pressure and political fatigue that goes with all of that. So what's happening from the top? The things that are coming down and crushing us, these performance hits, these personality conflicts. Oh my gosh, personality conflicts. You see those every time there is an organizational shuffle. And let me tell you right now, I'm not a big organizational shuffle fan. It's like throwing marbles into a bowl, stirring them and pulling out the same marbles and think you've done something different, right? So personality conflicts are where that really shows up. And then there's career hits, right? We suddenly are doing a change within the organization and I no longer see myself in the picture. So when you start adding some of these things up, it's like compounding interest, right? Our relationship with a thriving workplace is founded on trust, comfort, psychological safety, faith in a future, sense of belonging, acknowledgement of our value. All of those things are what make it easy to be able to add our lives in on top of that. And so we've said quite a few times that this pandemic has really ripped open the underbelly of what's wrong and what's right in a lot of organizations. So the weariness is costly and it's real. Mental illness is costing Americans $193 billion in lost earnings. $193 billion. Task and function interruption and depreciation is happening. Lost time and effort with ripple repercussions throughout the organization. We are a system, and our team is a system that we live in, right? And then that's inside of a system. So we have these circular systems that are all impacted by what happens at the individual level. If you break one piece of the system, the rest of the system doesn't work well. So you get fear of failure, risk of job and career burnout, wellness, health and performance issues. You have guilt, shame, anxiety, stress. And that's been this year. that has truly been this year. There is an emotional compounding leading to health issues with the increase of cortisol in every one of us as we juggle kids and dogs barking and having to, run into a bathroom to be quiet because we need to go into a meeting, or having to pull up to a Starbucks because our internet isn't working and we have to join that meeting and sit in our car. All of those things are beginning to pile up, and it's been a really tough year. So when we talk about change, and we are about to embark on that, we are about to embark on organizations that are extremely busy right now, trying to figure out how to reinvent themselves. So they're taking a major change fatigue, position, and they're saying, hey, you know what, this is a great opportunity to reinvent everything we are. And they're going to layer that on top. And I think as organizations, certainly, we have a real responsibility to take a step back and really do this thoughtfully. And that's why change management is important. It's not the person you hire to swoop in that says, make it nice over here for these people in this corner, like Roy said, right? This right now is where the rubber's hitting the road. We are in that time for almost every organization on the planet right now. That's why change is important, but not traditional OCM.
Well, I was just going to pick up on that, because the thing for me when you were talking about the circular systems that, one living inside another and so on, those ripples, it's quite interesting. We know that those ripples can build into a tsunami. So we need to be paying attention to the smaller ripples as they're occurring and deal with those things. Absolutely. And their traditional change approaches are just not going to cut the mustard at this time. I don't believe so. And speaking of other beliefs, I think, because cortisol is so toxic. If we've got this big pumping cortisol in our system and the fear and everything, it's like any chemical in the system. It's like someone that's run the marathon at the end and, everything goes into shutdown and you see them crawl over that line. They're not paying attention to the wear and tear, rest and repair cycle. And that wear, tearing and rest and repair cycle can happen in small increments or it can happen in large. And I just don't believe that they're paying enough attention to the smaller incremental cycles they need. And those beliefs also come into the fact, I don't really believe in this word like resistance. Resistance to me is when you're building your strength. Like you do at the gym, we have our resistance bands and all those kinds of stuff. I think there's something, really something about the resistance of change and believing that people resist change. So, and Greg, I know you've got some opinions around this. So do people really, do you think they really resist change? Yeah, you've got an opinion? Yeah, I know you do.
I do have an opinion on this, and we've heard it all the time. People hate change, people resist change, people fight change. So much of the not normal change or organizational change that Patty's talking about deals with, resistance to change and overcoming that and identifying people's, openness and adaptability to change. Here's the thing. I'm going to say it here. That's bunk. People do not resist change, and here's why. We change all day, every day as human beings. We are constantly changing. What we resist is a situation where we find ourselves being irrelevant. We resist something happening that we are not convinced that is going to be a positive outcome for us. So this change to the organization that you're talking about, if I don't see myself in it, if I don't see myself being successful in that new world order, it's human nature. I'm not going to voluntarily lend my support to something that leaves me without a spot. And so as change leaders, it's much more systematic and much more strategic than just simply saying, hey, identify who's struggling here and let's see if we can get them past this. It's insulting and it's insincere and it's completely ineffective. If you want change, then model change. If you want your staff to be adaptive, then as a leader, you have to build a culture in which that is the thing. I find it so fascinating that leaders who demand change, want change, themselves just relabel the same old behavior that they've been doing for a long time with new words, like we're being agile and we're being adaptive and we're scrumming and we're stand-upping and all whatever the parlance. But at the end of the day, you're actually doing exactly the same thing, and people know it. And so they go, wink, wink. Oh, okay, we're going to change. We're now going to call it something else. So the thing is, no, people don't resist change, but they resist being put in a circumstance where they may not have a viable place. People want to do things that are valuable. People want to make a contribution. People want the safety to know that I can contribute here and I can raise issues and I can help solve those issues. And if I have that, then I'll take all the change that you can throw at me. Keeping in mind, Patty said some monumental things that I wasn't prepared for about the change layering. And I think we really need to be mindful of that, because we've been through the most significant change that we've ever seen in modern times. And we would be ill-advised as leaders to just go, all right, well, that was fun. Now let's get back to this thing. That would be epic fail. You heard it here. Quote me on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That viability is so important, isn't it? Like the feeling that that I'm viable, not just valuable, but I'm viable. And I think there's a real difference between understanding whether you're valuable and, I kind of know, wow, yeah, but what's going to change here, for what needs to happen for me in order to affect or to make a difference to that change? Or how can I change to get out of this situation that's been enforced upon me? And part of that, I think, is, Patty, you've already touched on the structure of things. And, Roy, you've talked a little bit about, what that core ingredient of commitment that's actually required. And that commitment has to come from both sides, I believe. And so as part of that, though, we might tap into that. But what happens on a structural level? I mean, how does the change often impacts our execution of tasks? So why is it important to understand the impact?
Is that moi?
Yeah.
Well, I've quoted this a bunch of times. Some years ago, at a local chapter meeting of HDI, we were talking about projects that various organizations were doing that year. We were interested in finding out what they were concentrating on. And one of the people there told a story of, they were making some major upgrades to their systems and so forth. And one person in the organization called the service desk and said on the phone, "Yesterday, I knew how to do my job. Today, I don't." And that goes to what Greg was talking about, that type of feeling irrelevant. But also the fact that that is a symptom of not being provided the proper resources. Some of you have seen me talk about change, know that I think about this in terms of 5 elements: vision, incentives, resources, skills, action plan. And what that tells me when somebody says something like that is that they're not getting the resources and they're not getting the skills, coaching, and training that they need in order to move to the next step. So it's important to include all the elements. You've got to have all the elements in order to get to that final step where people actually move forward, and they do it. They may not jump at the opportunity, but they probably do feel a lot more willing to take that step and start doing things differently because they have the resources, the skills, and they understand where they're going.
Yeah. There's one person in our guest room here that I know knows this so well, Miss Kathy. Making sure that you people have the skills and resources to enable and enact their part so that the change can occur. So what's your opinion and thoughts around what you've heard so far?
Oh, many. I could talk about this for the rest of the today and through the weekend ad nauseum. It depends on if the change is coming from, you're doing some kind of corporate change because you're shifting direction as a company or an organization. It's a different thing if you are looking to make improvements or I should say, rethink who we are going to be, as many are doing right now. And the first and foremost thing is to involve people. When you're making change, you may think you know how it's going to play out. And so play it out, play it out in your mind. We say, play that tape forward, right? And people that used to listen to tapes, and play it through. But be open and honest with yourself first and foremost. If you play it through and you don't communicate and you don't give them the tools and all that kind of stuff that we just talked about, it's going to be you marching through change. That's what makes it difficult on people. When you involve them, you get them on board, you are over communicating about it, you're getting feedback along the way from your people. They'll start to get on board, but get their feedback and address the feedback. If you're going to get their feedback, you have got to be prepared to respond to it. The other thing I want to say is that sometimes change, when we're looking within it, we forget that our people have so many ideas on how to get to where we want to be, because they are the ones that have been, that I knew how to do my job yesterday. I don't know how to do it today. They are the ones that, if we talk about where we are right now, they're the ones that have been doing their jobs. Hopefully you have been, as a leader, gathering information along the way. And maybe some of it you couldn't do in the model that you were in a year ago or even half a year ago. But take that as you plan where you want to be. And the other thing I want to tell people is it's a million little things. Sometimes making change, even if you know where you want to go, it's a million things along the way. I had a glass wall in my office and we made it into an idea board. And the ideas that my team came up with that were small, that added up over time to significant change, they were on board because they were brainstorming as people. But I want to say the other thing is, the last organization I was in, I had 3 managers in my office. I had one who wanted to go back and tell me the 15, 20-year history on everything when I was suggesting something. I had another that said exactly what we said here. We've done that before and it didn't work. And we had another that, as I brought in the new leadership style, she started to challenge her colleagues. It wasn't even coming from me because she was seeing the new way of thinking. And so just because you've done it before, what I challenge people out there to think is, how did you do it before? Why specifically did it fail before? Was it because of a prior leadership? Was it you didn't have resources? Don't just say we did it before, it's not going to work. Or this is all the history of the company, because the history 20 years ago, to a large degree, is irrelevant today because we do live in that world of ever-ending change. And so when we talk about organizational change here, I hope that as leaders, we are setting our people up every single day for change. Because all of us being in, the IT world or HR that works with us, it's a forever. And so when you get to those bigger projects of change, you are in a team, you're in it together. They feel as though they are valuable contributors. They feel they can come to you if they disagree with something. And it starts with you. The change is not about you. The change is about, what is it going to do for your employees? And especially if there's something that you have to go through that's not necessarily a positive change that you agree with, how do you show up? How do you show up?
And I think there's a cycle that we can enact sometimes that, wouldn't it be so great if where we left before is still using what we put in place? What a nice accolade, what a great legacy. That's wonderful. But what I've often found is that, which is fabulous, because you've actually left them in a better place than you found it in the first place. That for me is a good thing. You should always leave a place better than when you found it. One of the issues, though, is that I find that people have hunkered into that history is that they've got all these myths and legends, when so-and-so was here and this is what we did, and wow, have you heard about? And we should do it that way because that's the way it worked before, you know. So I think we need to deal with what is the reality now instead of the myths and legends that exist. However, I think to make that bridge, we have to pay homage to the myths and legends. I think we have to acknowledge those things
If I could add
in order
one thing,
to find that space to move forward.
right. And I think absolutely, the last thing you want to do is come in and poo-poo the past, if I use such a simplistic term. But know the right questions to ask, and we've talked about that a lot. Know the right questions to ask, is if it's something that's not in place, but there's something you did before, why aren't you still doing it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, so NJ, that's a really nice segue into you know, the myths and legends and reality of change. So what's your take on what you've heard and that side of things?
So I wrote a note down here, and Kathy had some really great dialogue. And I wrote down. So first thing I like is she talks about adoption and transparency, and I believe also kind of what I heard from her, kind of in between the margins, is like cooperation and collaboration of everyone involved towards to really gaining traction on change. But when we talked about myths and legends, I wrote a note down here, and I wrote challenge lazy thinking. And by lazy thinking, it's the what Kathy mentioned. It says, "Hey, we've tried this before," and she like phenomenally really laid it out. And I'm just really building on the wisdom that just came before me, in that, okay, yeah, so it didn't work before. Why not? Well, why are you resisting change? Why are you so much against where we're trying to go now? Really pushing back against those lazy thinking, because it's very easy to dismiss these new ideas and such, just because you fear some type of maybe irrelevancy, and a lot of times it's done just because of that, maybe past experiences of similar change efforts. And so like really challenging that lazy thinking of, we tried this before, or we don't need to change, or we don't need to grow, or we don't need to go XYZ, because I think when you start getting the other person who's propagating that lazy thinking, they start seeing the errors in their thought processes, which opens up opens up possibility. And so, and even I would go a step further in that we don't then dismiss those who have lazy thinking when we see that light bulb come on. It's making them an advocate for change as well, and bringing them on board to cooperate and being transparent and just demonstrate and showing them the value and the viability that they have in the change process, tying it back to what Roy said earlier about that vision and the game plan.
Yeah. And I tell you what, there's someone in this room that has constantly challenged my lazy thinking over the years. Every time I say something, there's and why is that? And that's Mr. Daniel Breston, who through, doing experiential learning and coaching is, pretty good at asking the hard questions to do that. So Daniel, what are your thoughts and feelings at the moment in this conversation?
I think if you're going to, there's that famous cartoon, right? Who wants change? Everybody raises their hand. Who wants to lead change? The room's empty. And you've got, and I realize there are some cells before that, but I was reading Patrick Lencioni, and he had some comments about change that I decided I was going to bravely try. And the question to a group of senior individuals was, okay, so you want a new strategy? Yes. Why do you want a new strategy? Well, we have to hit our numbers, we have to satisfy customers, da-da-da-da-da. And I let them go, and I went, okay, listen to the question carefully. Why do you want a new strategy? Why do you want to change? And there was dead silence. And I didn't speak, which is hard for me, right? And there was this looking at me. And I went, folks, if you can't express why you want the change as an individual and as a group, how the heck is the rest of the organization supposed to understand what you want? Even if you guys don't agree on everything, at least can you agree not to kill it when you walk out the door? You have to speak as a common voice. You have to speak as a common language. And if, as Patty and Kathy and NJ were saying, the short-term experiment fails, then be willing to change, be willing to pivot, be willing to say, okay, we tried that. Yeah, that didn't really work. Sorry about that, folks. So I think, change equals vulnerability. And that's a big leap for a lot of people. I have to be vulnerable to lead the change and accept that maybe I was not spot on. And I have to be vulnerable to accept somebody else's input that might actually make the change go better, faster, safer, and happier, to quote the great John Smart. And
Wow.
Simone, why do you keep picking on me?
Daniel, thanks for taking my role. I appreciate that.
Because it's more fun when we co-facilitate. Oh, I love it. It's a comedic duo. What can I say? And you know what? Beautifully, every single one of you has found something that you've said that perfectly segues into the expertise and depth of knowledge that other people have. So do you know it? I can see you nodding your head that as soon as Daniel said, we have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable in order to make the changes. And you're our HR and compassionate leader here. So what are your thoughts?
I've got so many thoughts, but I have some little notes written here to keep me on track to the core of this discussion. And I go back to skepticism. Skepticism is based in fear. And it feels as though, let me talk about retirement communities. There happens to be a lot of movement in retirement communities, and it's very often at the very top. So CEOs and executive directors are jumping from community to community to community. So what the employees and the leaders are seeing is, we'll be here long after you're gone, and we're going to smile and be pleasant. And in the communities, they call it the flavor of the month. That basically we're switching to this. Don't really dig into it, because that campaign or that marketing issue or that initiative with the t-shirts and the slogans that have words that come out from them, that'll go away, and next year nobody will be talking about it. And I led a retreat last year. It was supposed to be live, but it ended up being virtual. And it was for a woman who was taking over a community. And she knew that she was a different type of leader than the leader previous to that, who had been there, of course, for 25 years. So she wanted to start it off on the right track. And we talked, and we had this retreat for 4 hours. And we talked about 3 groups that need to not make change happen. You don't make change happen. You work through change, because, as was said earlier, it's constant. It's not like the TV show where the head of the starship says, make it so. I mean, so often that's what people say. We want this, make it so. We want a campaign to show that we care about our employees. We'll call it We Care, and blah, blah, blah. We'll get t-shirts and we'll get all this other stuff. So change is constant, but there's 3 groups. There's how does it affect senior leadership and what is their role? And then how does it affect middle management and what is their role? And how does it affect the front line, the individual employee, and what is their role? And we have to be cognizant of the competing concerns about each group. Each group, as we go back to our discussions, each group is responsible for hearing the group below them. And I say below, not in a bad way, but there's such an issue with trust, which goes back to the vulnerability. There's a huge issue with trust. part of that is they see that when a change comes along and it doesn't work, what's going to happen? Is it going to be finger pointing? Who's the person? Why did that not work? And who did that? Who didn't support the change? So that discussion needs to be brought on the table, which it was in this retreat. The next thing is making sure that everybody has a voice. Everybody, when you bring up a new idea and it didn't work, why did that not work and what would you have done differently? We need to be sure that we're answering suggestions from employees at the front lines, because how are they going to feel if they're having change constantly pushed on them, but when they have a suggestion about a change, as Kathy was saying, it's, oh yeah, well, that's nice, and it goes in a drawer. So it needs to work up and down the communication, and the communication is the key piece. Getting that elephant out on the table and saying, why are you concerned about this? What are you afraid of? And talking about it. A lot of it has to do with control. The people who have gotten really secure in their position and they know what to expect. And the last thing I wanted to say was, when I was working somebody else mentioned the tools. When I worked at Spiegel Catalog Order Center back in the day before any online stuff, you actually called and got a representative. They came in every day to a fat notebook. And if there had been a change that they needed to know about, it was in that notebook, in that script. So we were handing them, or corporate or marketing or whoever was handing them the tools they needed so that they weren't taken off guard by a question about something that had happened over here. They worked really, really hard on that, because the worst thing about change is not being there to support the unexpected at the front lines. That's the worst thing. You've got to plan for everything you can and then deal with the unexpected. And be willing to hear new ideas, and don't do what nursing does. In nursing, we call it eat their young. We have these seasoned nurses and then we have these dynamite, great people coming out of school, and they have all these ideas, and the protocol for drawing a blood sample may not be what they have learned, but maybe there is a better way. Maybe we could talk about it back and forth. Again, back to communication, but we have to not eat our young, because they leave. And that's what I've been involved in, is the turnover, the churn of frontline people that just come and they leave and they're all excited. They got their big healthcare flag and then they're out the door in 2 months.
Yeah, I think business can learn a lot from nature, and there are certain things that they shouldn't learn from nature.
Exactly.
There's a whole heap of things there that we could dive into right now, but I'll leave that for another session. But yes, absolutely, definitely, we're working through the change. And part of that, though, is having a comfort level factor or something to hold on to, like a playbook. And someone that I know is really good at putting playbooks together, Miss Patty. So how can an organization actually drive that commitment to change and transformation?
Wow. So how many hours do we have?
Exactly. Not
But
that
really,
long.
really, I want to address a few things that were said, because I've done organizational change as a competency for over 13 years for change and transformation. And there's been some comments, and I've written some of them down that I really want to address. One is challenge lazy thinking. The other one is resistance. And then we want to talk about trust and vulnerability. I want to challenge everyone. So when I go into how can we drive commitment, I want to challenge everyone to change the word from resistance to response. People respond to how well we prepare them. Okay, so Kathy and Dee both brought up communication as a key indicator. Roy mentioned it as well. We want to over-index, over-index on every single communication. We want to truly make this change something that they can see as viable and valuable, so that their response is not about seeing the old as better, but the new as better. right? In order to do that, we need to first understand 4 things. We need to be able to tell people at the individual level, like Daniel has mentioned, what's in it for me many times throughout, his visits with us. What's in it for me? Yes, we have to address the individual level, and we have to tell them, what are we pitching? What are we getting rid of? What's new, right? What are you going to see that's different? How are you going to have to do something different? So people need to clearly understand what they're going to do. And then at the system level, they have to understand overall what's changing. Right? So those are the 4 things. So what are we going to pitch? What are we going to do? What's new and what's changing? So you have to define commitment at all levels, and that's a big approach. That takes an awful lot of planning, and it takes planning at the back end before anyone even knows the change is happening. Change and transformation is a leadership issue. A lack of clarity is a systems problem. When even one part of that system is broken, like I said before, the system does not function. So what you do at the individual level can only get you so far. You absolutely have to address, how do the individuals add value? But in order to get there, in order to even have that conversation, you have to give people a reason to change. I love Versa, what Roy talked about, right? It always starts with a vision. So you have to show your commitment. We talk about with leaders, when we go into the C-suite, we say, it's all about ready, willing, and able. It is the leader, then the organization. So you model from purpose to sustainability. And modeling as a leader includes being able. You want to see the change succeed. So let me give you a description. Ready. Cool. I've signed off on the budget. There, we're ready. Let's go. Hire some change person, put them over in the corner, right? Willing. I'll lead the steering committee meetings. I'll listen to what all you other little peons do. Okay, you're willing. You're willing to let someone do it. You've added a little budget to the change. Able. I am taking an active role by learning what I have to change first. Okay, so that's ready, willing, and able. If you want commitment to a change, if you want commitment to any of those, you have to drop the opinion that, oh, we're going to make these changes here first, and eventually we'll work up to those VIPs at the top level. I call BS on that. I will always call BS on that. Okay, the way it works is you have to ask those VIPs to know that if they are delegating change, it is problematic and backward. In order to fail fast, the leader has to change first, right? So how you support the change, what you need to change, the governance and policy around the change, and the experience. You as a leader must experience that change first in order to understand the effort involved. So in this time of acceleration and change, we don't have the luxury. We just don't have the luxury to say, hey, let's hire somebody 2 weeks before rollout and ask them to make it nice for the people. Layered change, the way it is happening and the way it is going to continue to accelerate, is not going to happen organically anymore. We can no longer say to people, you figure it out. We have to just keep going. We have to consciously and specifically be willing at the very top levels to lead and design change with the change team. Okay, off my pedestal, but that's how I feel.
Now that's what I call committed.
Wow.
That's committed to the knowledge, committed to the sharing, committed to ensuring that there is the opportunity that you've just provided as a call to action. Absolutely. And
erase the word resistance from your vocabulary, please. Look at how they're responding.
No, I
What
won't
are you doing?
erase that. I won't erase that. I'm
You
going to
are
resist
always the
erasing it.
resistor.
That's it. I used to be a
I
transistor.
thought he was the
but now I'm a
transistor.
Greg,
That was a big,
Greg,
little big one.
Roy is responding to my comments. Could you please take care of him for me?
Well, actually, speaking of that, Greg, speaking of taking, you might be able to say then, what's the biggest mistake someone new in an organization actually makes when they intend? Let's talk about intent. I wasn't sure about Roy's intent then. What's the intent? What's the mistake they make with intent?
Wow. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to share my story in detail. But when you were hired as a change leader, as an expert in the things that need to be changed and adopted in an organization, it can be very easy to assume that the foundation has been laid and that the support at the leadership level is in place for the very change. I'm here to tell you that's a massive, massive mistake to believe that. So my counter to that is you've and several others. Actually, most of you talked about this. Is the understanding the history, the culture, and the context of the organization in which you intend to make change. Like it or not, you're the latest flavor in this whole continuum of, leader of the day, oh, the new manager is going to do stuff. And you're perceived. Everything that you do is perceived in that context that you may not even know. Like, I've been out working in Fortune 10 companies, making things happen, and I join your organization, and I perceive myself as able to solve your problems. You perceive me as yet another manager with a lot of great ideas, blah, blah, blah. We'll be here long after this one is gone. And why do we say that? It's not that we're cynical. It's that it's true. We've seen this happen for years and years and years. In you go, out you go, in you go, out you go. I jumped on Dee's We Care, and I put it together and made it a branded trademark name because we always come up with a program. We're going to do the We Care program. We're going to do the service management program. We're going to do the DevOps Agile, blah, blah, blah program. And they've seen it all. They've done it all. Here's what I did in that organization to regain my ability to drive change that I was dedicated to. I asked them, what happened? What's gone on here? What's going on? Why did that fail before? Why do you hate this so much when 90% of organizations are doing these things that we're talking about here? And what I found out is it was done unto them. They were steamrolled. They were told they were wrong. They were told they didn't know. They didn't understand. And so every word out of my mouth, which was, hey, wouldn't you like to be part of something excellent, was heard as, oh, you suck and you don't know how to do stuff. And thankfully I'm here and I'm smarter than all y'all and I can help you be less pathetic. Nobody wants that. Nobody buys into that. So I went on a journey. I call it going mining for gold nuggets. And here's what I found. The staff, had come up with lots of ideas, all of which were squashed by previous management, every one of them. And so I started asking, what have you guys been doing? What have you thought about? And I heard some things like the first day that I heard, we've done this before. I said, really? I said, because that's what I'm being told we need to do. And I go, yeah, because they wouldn't support it. And so I grabbed onto it and I said, let's make this run. If I'm going to go down in flames, I'm going to go down in flames, taking what you've done that you're passionate about and seeing if we can make it fly. And lo and behold, we did that. But you notice how my personal pronoun changed? It wasn't me leading change. It wasn't me with the great ideas. It wasn't me being an expert in the industry with 25 plus years of transforming organizations. It was we. And at the end of the day, when I left, I heard, hey, we had this in-depth audit of that thing that we worked on and that we made better and we succeeded. Just thought you might want to know that. In other words, I wasn't getting any credit for what we did. And that's exactly the way it should be. I think somebody's on mute. I silenced the panel.
You did it again. Oh my God. I love the whole language question, the I, you, we. And speaking of language issues, I will turn it over to our etymologist here, Master Roy. I want to ask you about, because there are issues we've all come across in various frameworks and that we deal with when it comes to change. Kotter's 8-step model for org change has been very popular. Tell me what do you disagree with any of it? Oh, and Roy's on mute. There we go.
Yeah, welcome back, Cotter. Means the same thing. Is coming back again and again. Sorry.
I used to love that show, don't you?
I have a disagreement with the Cotter model, which is that it starts with urgency. Oh, we have to do this. What do we have to do? Why do we have to do this? Why should we be urgent about it? Why is what I want to know. And so I think you have to start with, as Patty mentioned, the Versa model, which is you start with the vision. Let's see, this is where we want to go. This is our aspiration. This is why we're going to institute these changes. And if you start with that, not creating a sense of urgency, the urgency will come if people understand why they need to change. They will see the benefits for them, and that's the incentive. All right. Then you give them the resources and the skills to be able to move from one way of doing things to another way of doing things. And you tell them how it's going to happen. That's your action plan. I love that model. Much better than create the urgency first. Well, I don't know what I'm being urgent about. I don't know why I'm being expected to feel like, oh, we got to do this. I do want to go back to something that Greg mentioned too, which is just that, we lead change. We have to take part in it. And Patty you mentioned this as well. It's got to be, we have to manifest the change and we have to take part in the change. We have to be willing and we should go first. And that's really important. If you don't do that, then you're going to be fighting with everybody along the way. So.
Yeah, the whole lead from the front. Sometimes I think that we've forgotten how inspiring that is. Normally we say, okay, leaders that we can stand behind, they can support us as we're going through this. We've seen the old pyramid models being turned on their head, where it's actually the leadership should be at the bottom supporting the whole thing on the way up. But I think when we see these visual changes in the models, that really, we should be on that horse holding the sword and leading it up. I'm a fan of Joan of Arc, what can I say? And we should be doing that to really, I think it's a sense of protection as well. We're out there, we're showing you the way, and that's a perfect question then for Patty to say, well, who has to be in the room when that vision is being designed? Because if a leader's taking them there, that's great. But who actually should be part of saying, well, that's the direction we should be going in?
Listen, the vision has to be designed by the C-suite, and it has to include every owner of every department. It isn't some IT group over here that designs a vision and gets approval. It's facilitated at the C-suite, and it includes your communications person, a marketing person, your HR, your IT. HR is a function that is responsible for the entire organization. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone in as an organizational change manager and they're not sitting at the table. I can tell you right now that if you do not have full representation in designing the vision with your communications person, with a facilitator, actually make it an event so that it makes sense, your vision's going to fall flat. Remember, we talked a couple weeks ago about the vision being so spectacular and the reveal sucking? Well, that's where change fatigue starts, right? When we get in there and we find out that the vision had no correlation, nothing to what we would be doing in the end, then we have fallen flat. Also, if it's an old business function, right? So the company needs a change team. And I'm just going to throw this right out there. Change is absolutely needed to be a function within the organizations where we teach middle managers the best way to change from that vision. So when we've got a vision, we have to actually provide, like Roy says, the tools and resources for those middle managers to drive change, because they get left out. And all of a sudden, it's their people they're being held to task for, and they're not actually able to equip themselves well enough to help it along. So, you know, I always insist on OKRs being defined at the top level. That's objectives and key results for a transformation. If you haven't defined objectives and key results for a transformation at the very top level, how can you expect it to cascade down to the rest of them? You have to have the vision, but then you have to define the key results you're trying to achieve as a business, and it has to align contextually to what your outcomes are. Anyway, that's my we're getting to the end.
We are getting to the end.
I'm just looking at our time, so I've shut up.
I know.
I have so
but I
much more
tell
to
you
say.
There's just so much more to get out there. There always is. But you know what? It's an iterative process. It'll come around again. It's okay. Just to wrap up, I thought I'd just do a quick round robin with you guys. And Patty, I'm going to start with you on this one. And I think it's because it can be controversial, but I actually really like the idea of this. If this change management is actually an all of business function, you know, it goes across the whole organ, we're all part of it. So does a company actually even need a change team?
Yes. Someone has to be responsible, but we have to change the responsibility that history has laid upon change managers, right? So I should be responsible for being able to help design the approach, but everyone else needs to be responsible for helping me roll out the plan. And you know, I did a change for 50,000 people. I needed 104 different change agents out in the field to help me with that. I needed marketing to help me build all of the tools around the change in order to make it viable. I needed HR to help me address the policies that might be counter to that large change. I needed, and that all cascaded down from that vision. And so I honestly believe, because the acceleration, that we need to build an internal competency for change, and then allow that to truly be a way we move from program to organizational lifestyle. Yeah. Right? We have to shift from calling it a program to really designing what is the organizational lifestyle through getting through layered change.
That kind of reminds me of, and it was when we were talking about programs before, because I used to work in advertising and placing adverts in the various shows. One of the things that always made me giggle when I think of programs in the business world is that I'm going to cancel that program, and I'm going to swap it around in the schedule with this program, and I'm going to put the advert in there because this is the storyline. So it's actually, I love that idea that it's not a program, it's actually a storyline.
Or organizations are organisms.
Exactly. It's a story. It's the way we keep evolving and growing, and the ability to be able to maneuver and swap things in and out and bring in new things. I think that's brilliant. Daniel, what's your last little that you'd like to leave people with today?
Don't let change be underpinned by blame.
Yep. I like that. That's nice. Kathy?
Show up and be the change you want to see.
Yeah. Dee? Oh, you're on mute, darling.
Create a culture of change, just the way we create cultures of everything else. And let people know this is a competency and an expectation and a job skill.
Yep. Speaking of cultured, Greg,
have
he grew.
a
Not in a petri dish, but he did grow.
have a genuine interest in people.
Yeah, definitely. Roy, what's our final philosophy on this one?
We have to go from the switch being on to the switch being off. We're changing from being on the air to being off the air. I'm just going to wrap up by saying that there's been some really, really great ideas here today, and thank you. Thanks for facilitating the conversation, Simone. Thanks for the sharing of thoughts. Some of this is very important for people to understand, because organizations do require change, and that change has to happen somehow successfully. And so, we've seen the stats over and over and over again. Projects fail, initiatives fail, programs fail because of the lack of understanding of how to create success, and usually a lack of definition of what that success looks like as well. So thank you to our guests. NJ Robinson had to take off, but Dee Burgoyne and Kathy Velboom and Daniel Breston, he of the blurred background, which looks very classy, sir, I must say, looks very sharp. And and then we have our core four, as we call ourselves. We have our questioner du jour, Simone Jo Moore. We have the strapless Greg Sanker. No strap on that guitar today. And the ever brilliant Patty Blackstaff. And we will say, don't forget to KTLO, keep the learning on.